and welcome to Unleash Monday. I hope you're enjoying the first few episodes, and by now you're getting a feeling of what this podcast is going to be about. During my research, I realized there's such a lot of prejudice and stereotype around the word of giftedness and gifted adults, and people have suggested to not actually call it what it is, gifted, but use different synonyms, different adjectives, and just by mentioning the pain points to capture the unidentified adults so that they really relate and come and get a feeling for the topic. So today's guest is Dr. Marie-Lise Schläppy. She's an expert on not calling it what it is, and I had a really great conversation with her. I hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's just dive right in and have a listen. Let me know what you think. Please, if you like the show, subscribe. Find me on Instagram at unleash.monday. There's also a website, unleashmonday.com. So I would really love to hear from you. But first, let's have a listen. Dr. Marie-Lise Schläppy, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome. I'm very excited to talk to you. And let's jump right in. So
yes, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So how did you get interested in the topic of gifted adults?
Yes, so my first career was in social work and special education. And subsequent to this, I decided to go and train in something I had been dreaming about since childhood, which was marine biology. So then I kind of branched out and did that. But I kept an interest for all things social work related and special pedagogy and all the rest of it. And at one point when I didn't have a job in marine biology, I was back in Switzerland and realized that through my search for information on sensitivity, I found a lot of materials about gifted children mostly, and realized that in the French-speaking side of Switzerland, there's not all that many people that are trained in that field. And so I decided to go and get a certificate of advanced studies at the university in Liestal and bring it back to the French-speaking side, because the Germanic side of Switzerland is much more advanced when it comes to gifted pedagogy. And I thought, something to bring to the French speakers of Switzerland if I went and trained, because I can also speak German. So it's easy enough for me to train in another language and then bring it back to my own language. So that's how basically it started. So then I realized that there's a lot of materials out there for gifted children, because schools are involved and psychologists are involved often and all the rest of it. But when it comes to adults, there's very little out there.
Yes, I agree. I was doing some research, and that's how I found you, right? You had a talk or a presentation, and you said your research basically conducted that you shouldn't call it what it is, basically gifted, if you actually want to reach these unidentified gifted adults. Do you want to share a little bit about that research that you did? And if we're not allowed or shouldn't call it gifted, how do we attract these unidentified gifted adults then to get interested in the topic?
Yes, that's a very good question, because as far as I understand, a lot of children nowadays are getting identified because we're more interested in testing children across the board, and we have more standardized testing in schools. But in the past, it wasn't necessarily the case. And so a lot of today's adults that were gifted children didn't get identified or picked up during their school years. And if somebody was academically minded and doing well in school, they would just get them to skip a class or even two, and that was it. That was the extent of it, right? So what happens is that next thing that happens is that these people are now having children of their own. And if school doesn't work as well as might be expected, the child might be tested in several ways to see what's going on, and then suddenly the parents realize that the child is gifted, and they go, but I was just like that myself when I was a child. So it puts the adults on a path of discovery for themselves. And then usually when that happens, there's a big hoo-ha, like a big moment of, now that explains a lot of things. And so that's one of the ways that adults can find out they're gifted. But those who don't have children, or if the children don't have the same characteristics, or if they don't get identified themselves, then they might never find out. So I was wondering, okay, what is it that we could do to pick those people up in some ways? Because it looks like that realization about themselves usually helps them better manage their emotions and interpret the past, and help them craft a future that's more appropriate for themselves. And came to the conclusion that if there's such a stigma associated with being gifted, that you're supposed to be that extra smart, and you're supposed to manage everything really well, and you're supposed to have a lot of success, financially, and in your professional life, in your private life, and it's often not the case. And so how do you scoop up those people and bring them a concept that might actually really help them to plan and have a better quality of life without using that word? And so using the wrong words was, I think, that was the topic of that presentation that I did at European Council for High Ability. And I was arguing, let's use other words to kind of catch those people, and so that they can develop to the best of their potential, not just the children, but the adults as well. So it's hard to know what that actually means, because this was basically a hypothesis I put down and presented, but I never went ahead and did the work, because my marine biology career is quite all-consuming for me, and I'm publishing in that department, and so I can't do everything, but I'm interested to do that in the future. If anyone else would like to collaborate on this, that'd be great. And I think that maybe the one thing that is similar to all gifted people is their intensity. Susan Daniels and Michael Pechowski have written a book about that called Living with Intensity. I think that maybe that could be the word that we could use to, make a link between the intensity they bring to their, emotional life, to their work, to their outlook on certain topics, and anybody who's very intense in several areas of their life could be should probably ask themselves if it would be a good idea to read about giftedness and see if they recognize themselves in there.
Thank you. That's exactly how I felt. I was really just recently identified, and I never had a clue that this could actually be something that I should explore further. As you say, like gifted, it was never a word that really attracted me. And speaking to my friends that I now realize are also gifted, they also say they're very turned off by this word.
Mm-hmm.
Once I discovered that I'm gifted, I shared this information with my network and my parents. And the question that came was, why is it important for people to identify that they're gifted? And you already scratched the surface. You say, people have a more intense life, or their sensory is more honed. Mm-hmm. Could you explain a little bit more what are the issues or the pain points that people that are gifted live with? As you said, there's a lot of prejudice around it. You need to be successful. You should be very smart. You should be very good in school. But as we both know, this is probably not the case. So what are some of the main characteristics or pain point that people that hear this now could say, like, oh, maybe this is something I should look into, apart from this very intensity?
Yes, there's a few things that come to mind. Usually is there's a mismatch between what these people feel inside and their experience with the rest of the world. And we know that there's several definitions of giftedness, and the world of scholars hasn't managed to, just come with a final answer. It's very unsatisfactory, the way that different definitions lead to a very different answer of who is supposedly gifted. If we stick to the IQ standard, which has its merits and its problems, but is a well-known way of measuring it, then we're talking about a bit more than 2% of the population. So you're talking about people who clearly have an experience, an internal experience of their external world that is going to be different to the majority. And reconciling that is sometimes what is difficult. And being identified as an adult has the added bonus that you can put a word on maybe the feelings that you can have, that comparing your inner perceptions to other people's perceptions, or comparing them to the situations that you're in, and it gives an explanation. And from what I can see, with the explanation comes increasing well-being, because you can manage yourself better. That means you can lower your expectations in certain circumstances. If you're gifted and you're dealing with the rest of the world, you can change the expectation if they're not necessarily lower, but just change them. And it probably just really gives a lot of more patience to deal with the rest of the world. It gives more understanding from these people towards the rest of the world. And so overall, less stress and less misunderstandings, and overall leads to an increase in happiness and in fitting in. And also, once the adult gets identified, they can start seeking people that are like them. And usually, at least for children, we say that's a really, really important component of giftedness, which is to actually surround yourself with people that are like you, so that you can share experiences, with peers. And the bulk of the population would have many opportunities to do that, and gifted adults and children don't. So you can actively, as an adult, then look for those opportunities that will bring you in contact with people that are like you, or you could. We all still have. It's not a question of. You can still disagree or not like somebody who's also gifted, but there's still personality on top of that. But if you can find people that you can relate to, then you're more likely to find your space in the world, and that should bring a decrease of stress and an increase in happiness.
And I think I read somewhere that people that are gifted, they subconsciously find other friends or people that are also gifted. And then once you realize what is that makes the friendship really ticks, it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so I remember another topic that I'm dealing with quite a lot is the highly sensitive person, a concept brought to science by Dr. Elaine Aron. I remember somebody telling me, a highly sensitive person, to whom I was saying that right now research suggests that it might be 1 in 5 person is highly sensitive. And the person was saying, but all the people in my surroundings are like that. Everybody's like that. It's not true. It cannot be 1 in 5 for the highly sensitive person. It cannot be 1 in 5 because everybody's like this. Everybody I know is like this. So that would fit exactly in what you're saying, which is this person has somehow already managed to, find herself that little circle of friends and meaningful relationships with people who are like her. And that's probably a good thing. And so for gifted adults, it might be the same exactly. And They might think that most of the world is like this or should be like this. But this is when the label helps because when you realize how rare that is, then you stop having expectations that people should be like this, right? And so that gives you much more empathy and understanding for people that are quite different and who are, they're just different to you. So overall, empathy and compassion always helps increase your level of well-being. So I would say it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to find the right words and catch all of these non-identified gifted adults so that they can start that journey. And you have to remember that now that we're living much longer, if you find out that you're gifted at 40, you still have 40 years worth of life, that you can improve by working with that label. And usually what happens, as much for the highly sensitive person and the gifted people, what I can see is that at the beginning it's a bit of revelation to find out, and then the people are just like on a mission to find all the information they can. They want to talk to a whole bunch of people. They actually talk too much most of the time. They're so amazed by this whole thing that they actually talk to people who actually are unable to understand them. And so you might want to be a bit careful at the beginning if you find out, because because you're enthused by the topic and pretty convinced and all that doesn't mean everybody is. After that, it starts, the peak starts falling down, and they start revising all of what happened in the past in the light of this information. And then there's come a point where they can start crafting their future according to that information. And when they start doing that, then they don't need to share as much. They don't need to be as much kind of coached by others or bouncing ideas off others. They can kind of find their own path. And then it probably doesn't matter. So then it doesn't matter. But initially it does matter because, it helps heal the past. It helps answer a lot of questions about the past. And then, so in that regard, what Elaine Aron says about the highly sensitive person, I think applies to gifted people as well, which is the idea is to get to know the trait and really get to know what that all means. Go and revisit the past and look at things that didn't work out particularly well and those that did work out particularly well, reinterpret them in the light of that new information, and then start making steps and, basically coaching yourself to put some new strategies in place to craft a better future for yourself.
You really hit the nail on the head with what you said, and I feel you speak directly to me. This is exactly where I'm at, that I'm now wanting to talk and think that need to revisit the past in the light of this new finding. And you mentioned before that a lot of this is the inner experience, right, that these gifted adults have, which differs from the rest of the population. However, growing up, living your life, a lot of people feel the way they experience the world is the normal, or we all feel that sometimes we're not normal. Do you have a few examples of what this inner experience might differ so that people that are listening can think like, oh, maybe this is something I also relate? Is there some general kind of inner experience that is common in gifted adults?
Well, we don't know, right? Because that we have complete lack of research, and I'd love to do research. If somebody wants to put some money out there for a project with me, I'm in for it. There's one book in French, I think by somebody called Bonnard, who actually asked gifted adults a whole bunch of things, and unfortunately, it never got published in peer-reviewed journals and specialized journals. So. And it's in French, so not everyone can have access to this. But basically, remember reading the book. There were really interesting information, such as how much can you accept this discovery about yourself according to your age. The older you get, the older you are when you find out, the the less you can accept and the more angry it makes you, because that would make sense, because you go, how come I had to, adapt in so many ways to so many people all the time? Because if you're 2% of the population, never mind if it's gifted or if you have a rare disease or whatever, you're the one who's unlike the others. You have to adapt much more and have more patience than your average person. So they go, how come no one saw that? Like, how unfair is that? Like, who was in my childhood and how come they didn't see it? Why didn't my parents see it? Why didn't my teacher see it? Why didn't my soccer coach not see it? And then, are you telling me that I've lived my life now trying to suppress all these things when really I had a genuine reason for feeling or, behaving this way or that way? And so it's not neutral when you find out. And I think the earlier, the better. That's why I would say I would always advise parents to go and get their children tested and to talk about it. And it doesn't detract from the fact that we can all be working on something that's hard for us. And gifted or not, you're still in that basket, because if somebody's struggling at school, they might have something that they're struggling more specifically with that they need to work on, and somebody else will have emotions that are for them hard to deal with, and a gifted child or adult will have their own thing that's hard for them. And so if we all talk about what is hard for me and I'm working on it, and I'm giving you empathy for working on something that's hard for you, we're all working on something that's hard for ourselves, and we're trying to make a headway and just improve ourselves. And that can be applied to anyone. In that sense, this feeling of discovery at the very beginning can be quite traumatic if you're older. A lot of people that I talk to seem to have a sense of wonder, and I'm getting contacted by a fair few people, and I've had to put some limits at how much time I can spend talking to people, because I don't manage my own life, right? If suddenly, because it's like a thirst for information, and if they find somebody who can give a lot of information, they'll take that, because it's all consuming at the time when they find out. And that's fair enough. And there's a point where you don't want to say, okay, well, I don't want to talk to you, because that's not very nice or ethical. But at the same time, there's just too many people out there who go through this. So anyway, I've decided now I'm going to start offering a first contact with people who need this, but then they can also join one of the groups that I'm leading. So gifted groups that can share their experience together with me moderating the group, or also one-to-one session, but then it becomes coaching or mentoring relationships that becomes a professional thing, and not just a little discussion like this. So in the future, I'm really interested to find out about gifted adults, and when did they find out, and what did it mean for them, and especially about women, because a lot of women that might in the past, maybe people older than me, for example, who have decided to stay at home and be homemakers, have little ways to compare themselves to others. They're even more, their mind is even more, they're even more blown away when suddenly they find out through their children that they actually belong to that group as well. So there's a lot of improvement in outcomes for adult people, that we can offer through accompanying them through this phase, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your information. I'm one of these people that now seeks out all the answers that I can give, and this is how I obviously found you. And hopefully this episode also helps some people to get a few answers, and as a first step to then start their journey and their basically life as an identified adult. If people want to find your group, do you want to share the name?
Yes, you can contact me on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So Marie-Lise Schläppy on LinkedIn. And then I can start the conversation about the group. Usually what happens is that I propose the group to sequentially to whoever contacted me first and second, whatever. And then when I've got enough people, then we start the group. I usually try to have no more than 6 people in a group. And it's a flexible format, but still I ask that people commit to come to the group for a certain number of times so that everybody can count on having that moment together. And usually, because it's not very intensive in terms of like every week necessarily, it depends a little bit on everybody's availability. People work through their thirst for knowledge also on the side. And so the group is important at the beginning, but as time passes, people have ways to find the information they want. And so then it abates a little bit. But at the beginning, there's lots to be said about also who you talk to, because yes, you don't necessarily want to like blast this information everywhere, because somehow there's still some stigma against somebody who tell others that they're gifted. I don't know, it just maybe plays on other people's insecurities. I'm not sure. Usually it's not people who discover that about themselves. They're so amazed. They so didn't think they belonged in that group. They're not saying that to show how good they are to others. It's not done in that spirit at all. It's more like they can't believe it themselves, but sometimes it's badly taken. So at the beginning, you might want to be a little bit careful of who you say those things to. So those groups provide a forum for all those feelings, and maybe exchanging tips and strategies about this new discovery.
Is there anything else you would like to share that you think is really important for adults, identified or unidentified, to know? Or is there anything you wish you knew earlier?
I would say that I think this has the potential to change somebody's life. And as we seem to know that it's more disruptive later on in life than early on in life. I would say if you know of somebody who is very intense, and complexity is another one, who seeks complexity, and there's many ways to seek complexities, right? There's people who like to just do things that are complex and tackle topics that are complex. But there's also people who create complexity in their life by having an extremely complicated love life, for example. And they create complexity that way to quench their thirst for complexity, which sometimes is not necessarily to their advantage. And in short, I would say if you suspect that somebody might have potential for being part of that group of gifted adults, then I would find a text or a book that you find helpful for yourself, broach the subject and say, I've observed you and you look like you're very intense about certain things, and it looks like you like complexity a lot, and, this kind of fits this profile that I've been reading about, and and then you can suggest the book that you have found that you like. And there's one particular book that has been written by a Dutch author, and now the names elude me. You might know it yourself, Nadia. I'm not sure if you do. That is not talking about giftedness, but about this complexity and intensity as well. And they call it something completely different. And again, it's kind of trying to lure these people into these concepts. And maybe what you can do, Nadia, is go and look for this link together and then just provide it to the podcast listener underneath his podcast or something like this.
Yes, for sure. Let's keep in touch and then put the link in the show notes for the listeners. Thank you so much. This has been really an inspiring talk with you, and I'm really happy I've met you, and thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
How great was this conversation? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and you got a lot out of it. All the additional information you'll find in the show notes. So if you liked it, please subscribe. It will mean a lot to me. Share this episode with a friend, and I see you in 2 weeks. Bye!